Here to break it all down for us today are three guests. Amanda Makki, a lawyer and a 2020 congressional candidate in Florida. DJ Jordan, the former communications director for U.S. Senator James Lankford and currently the vice president of the Pinkston Group. And once again, Dr. Matthew Bunson, EWTN bureau chief and executive editor. Thank you so much for joining us. Matthew, give us some background on the once-a-year opportunity of reconciliation and the Byrd Rule.
Well, as you say, it's a once-a-year opportunity. In other words, as the House and Senate formulate their budgets, they instruct committees to look into the impact of those budgets. That leads to a process that's called reconciliation. And what that is intended to do is to sort of circumvent legislatively in a process the requirements for the 60-vote majority in the U.S. Senate. You have a similar thing in the House of Representatives, but the way it's structured is not quite as important. So this is a means, technically, to overcome the potential filibuster. The Byrd Rule applies here, and that's important, too. You go all the way back to the 1980s when it was first imposed. That is intended to sort of weed out extraneous legislation that doesn't actually pertain to the budget and also places limits on the debt and, of course, potential impact on Social Security.
With that context, Amanda, over the past 4 days, we've seen Senator Manchin publicly oppose in the Washington Post getting rid of the filibuster following the lead of Senator Sinema from Arizona, who made her stance in the Wall Street Journal. What does this mean for President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan?
It means that he's going to have a very difficult time passing this through the United States Senate, but I think he was going to have a hard time passing it through the U.S. House. Look, there are Democrats who are saying the infrastructure, and I say, quote, infrastructure, because there are so many ancillary, extraneous things in there that don't pertain to infrastructure, like roads and bridges and highways. But you have Democrats that say this should be a $10 trillion package. They're more progressive. You have moderate Democrats that say this should be pared down. We just spent $2 trillion on a COVID relief bill. That's on top of spending over $4 trillion on COVID relief since last March. These are real dollars that taxpayers are going to have to account for. And people want to know why Congress is pushing these massive bills. And Democrats, just because they have a slim majority in the single digits in the House and a 50-50 split Senate, that they would be pushing this. They're not going to be able to do this without the filibuster. But more importantly, it's not just this bill. And there are so many things. The Democrats have pent up frustration over the last 4 years, not having control. They want to push through, especially the voting law that they're looking to enact that would mandate mail-in voting, that would
HR1.
mandate ballot harvesting, and change the dynamics of elections for years to come in favor of the Democrats.
DJ, used by both Democrats and Republicans, budget reconciliation has given us changes to the Affordable Care Act, and it gave us the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's hardly used only for budgetary matters, just like Matthew talked about. What can we expect, even with Senator Manchin's warning that relaxing budget reconciliation norms would give us new and dangerous precedent that would be set to pass sweeping partisan legislation that changes the direction of our nation every time there's a change in political control?
Yeah, you can just go down the list of a few pieces of legislation that would pass simply by simple majority, and I don't think that would be good. And I don't think the American people want that. You can talk about the Green New Deal. You can talk about Medicare for all. You can talk about the Equality Act. One topic of debate this week is the Hyde Amendment. The stimulus bill did not have the Hyde Amendment in there to protect against federal funding and taxpayer funding of abortion. So that's a big problem. While I appreciate Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin coming out in support of the filibuster and against these types of reforms that are being discussed, if you live in West Virginia, if you live in Arizona, make sure that your voice is heard, to make sure to keep up the pressure to keep them on that position. I've seen too many politicians flip-flop on this, including our current president, Joe Biden, including our Vice President, Kamala Harris, senators like Cory Booker. They all have flip-flopped. They all were staunch supporters of the filibuster until they had an opportunity to pass their own agenda with a simple majority, and I think that's wrong. The American people want both parties to work together, and we should demand that of our Congress.
Amanda, you mentioned HR1 and DJ just mentioned the Equality Act. The proposed election integrity and voter access law is HR1. Are these two major pieces of legislation that seem unlikely to pass without aggressive moves like changing the Senate rules what concern you the most? What are the most concerning parts of these two pieces of legislation?
Well, I think really, making it illegal to check IDs. Look, the most recent polling shows that 75% of Americans agree that we should have voter ID checks. There's absolutely nothing wrong. When you go to a baseball game or you go to a concert, you have to show ID to pick up your tickets, don't you? You have to basically show your ID for every facet of your life. Sometimes I even get asked for ID using my credit card alone. So what is so harmful in wanting to have safe and secure elections? I think that is really important. And, if you look at the polling that was done just on what happened in November, whether you agree with, who's in office now and who isn't, that's irrelevant. But 75% of Republicans believe that we need to have free and fair elections, and we didn't in November. And 40% of independents who really determine the outcome of our elections. So it is important that we get this right. And what the Democrats are doing is they're trying to make the taxpayers be on the hook for campaign contributions to a candidate you may not want to give a single campaign contribution to. It may be morally objectionable for you to do that. But I think the voter ID piece is the most egregious. In addition to the mail-in balloting requiring all 50 states to do that, and ballot harvesting. For your audience, those of you who may not know what ballot harvesting is, it's when a third party can go door to door, apartment to apartment, and collect ballots. Now, what happens if that ballot comes from a house with a Trump flag in front of it, or a Biden flag in front of it for that matter? Then you could see that maybe the chain of command would go down, the chain of custody would go down on where those ballots actually end up. It's a very scary proposition.
That's right, Amanda. DJ, let's get your take on that. Former President Barack Obama called the filibuster a relic of Jim Crow. Was that an accurate description?
Look, I'm starting to learn about this whole cancel culture thing, and I don't know if it works that way, if politicians can just cancel former statements that they said. But former President Obama said this as senator in 2005. If the majority chooses to end the filibuster, if they choose to change the rules and put an end to the Democratic debate, then the fighting and the bitterness and the gridlock will only get worse. The list goes on and on of a lot of politicians who have defended the filibuster at one time because they actually heard from their constituents that they want people in Congress to work together. And many of them have flip-flopped, and I think that's very, very unfortunate. It's also very unfortunate that race is being infused into this. I think race is being used as a political weapon way too much in our polarized culture right now. I've heard Elizabeth Warren called it a relic of Jim Crow. That couldn't be further from the truth. The filibuster started in the 1830s, nearly 40 years before Jim Crow even began. The filibuster is used to protect the rights of the minority, and it's unfortunate to hear these Democrats not caring about the rights of the minority in Congress.
Matthew, why should this be of great concern to Catholics? Bring us home, bearing in mind that the Church teaches many things about the role of government.
Well, Catholic social teaching reminds us that the government has an important role to play. One of the fears from a Catholic social teaching standpoint is that doing away with the filibuster could, in fact, lead to an overreach on the part of government. We're already talking about bills in this conversation, such as the Equality Act, that is a massive overreach. We've also seen discussion of fears of abortion, of transgender agendas being advanced. So there is much to fear from a Catholic social teaching standpoint, and a need to rely on the government's use of the filibuster for everyone's rights.
Thank you all for your input. We'll be watching this closely.